On a Sunday morning in a church parking lot, two police officers hooked a tow truck to the mayor's car. The congregation watched as she stepped out in her lavender suit and pearls, phone to her ear. By the time the final hymn was sung, both officers were terminated. This is what happens when authority underestimates power. She is Mayor Ilara Vance, the first black mayor of a city long divided. For months, she's fought to reform a police department resistant to change. But that Sunday, the struggle moved from council chambers to holy ground. Why were two officers so eager to tow a car from a church lot? And what did they miss that would end their careers in minutes? The answer lies in a single, overlooked detail that turned a routine abuse of power into a catastrophic miscalculation. To understand the explosion in that parking lot, you must first understand the slow-burning fuse lit 6 months earlier. It began not with a confrontation, but with a policy. A simple, one-page memo from the mayor's office titled Civilian Oversight and Parking Enforcement Protocol. For decades, the Riverside Police Department operated with near-total autonomy. Towing, especially from private lots, was a gray area, a convenient revenue stream and a tool for informal punishment. Officers could call a favored tow company, get a car removed in minutes, and the vehicle owner would face a maze of fees and paperwork to get it back. Complaints, particularly from the city's Black and Latino neighborhoods, piled up for years. They spoke of cars disappearing while owners were in church, at community meetings, or visiting family. The response was always the same: proper signage, lawful enforcement, no recourse. Ilara Vance campaigned on changing that. A former civil rights attorney and city councilwoman, she won the mayor's office by 700 votes, a mandate thin as paper but fierce in intent. Her first month, she created the Office of Police Accountability. Her second month, she proposed stripping the police department of its direct towing authority, moving that power to a civilian parking bureau. The police union went to war. Union President Frank Donnelly, a bear of a man with 28 years on the force, called the proposal an insult. He framed it as a safety issue. Officers need to clear vehicles immediately for security reasons, he argued in fiery press conferences. What if it's a bomb threat? What if it's a crime scene? Vance's team countered with data. Of the 1,200 tows initiated by officers the previous year, less than 2% were for genuine emergencies. The rest were for unpaid tickets, expired tags, or alleged violations on private property. The battle lines were drawn in council meetings, on local news, and in the precinct halls. Younger, reform-minded officers quietly supported the mayor. The old guard, including officers Mitch Carbone and Ben Greer, saw it as a direct attack on their authority. Carbone and Greer were partners for 8 years. They were known as the collectors in certain circles, efficient, relentless, and deeply skeptical of any politician telling them how to do their job. The tension needed a spark. It came in the form of a church parking lot on Elm Street. Mount Zion Baptist Church sits in a transitioning neighborhood. Its congregation, once predominantly black, had seen an influx of younger, white professionals as property values rose. Parking on Sunday mornings became a coveted commodity. For years, an informal system worked. Church members parked in the lot, attendees filled the adjacent streets. But as new condos went up, street parking vanished. People began parking in the lot without permission during the week, some even on Sunday. The church board, seeking order, installed a sign: "Parking for Mount Zion Church events only. All others will be towed at owner's expense." They contracted with Apex Towing, a company known for its aggressive response times. The contract stated that towing required a call from the church pastor or his designated agent. It did not authorize police-initiated tows. Here is where the threads begin to intertwine. The pastor of Mount Zion was Reverend Isaiah Carter, a longtime supporter of Mayor Vance and a vocal advocate for police reform. He had testified before the city council about the predatory towing in his community. Officer Mitch Carbone's brother-in-law, coincidentally, was a manager at Apex Towing. The mayor, a member of Mount Zion since childhood, attended services every Sunday she was in town. She parked in the same spot, near the minister's reserved space, a courtesy extended to her by Reverend Carter. She was not designated agent to call for tows, but her city-issued SUV was well known. The new civilian parking policy was set to go into effect on the 1st of the month. The Sunday in question was the last Sunday before the switch. For Officers Carbone and Greer, it felt like the end of an era. That morning, they were on a routine patrol when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle near the church. It was a false alarm, but as they cruised through the empty lot, Carbone pointed. There it was, Mayor Vance's black SUV parked in its usual spot. No city placard was visible that day. It had fallen onto the passenger floorboard. Greer smirked. Think she's above the sign? Carbone radioed it in. Dispatch, unsure, said they'd check with the parking bureau. Carbone cut them off. It's a clear violation on private property. We're initiating a tow. He didn't call the church. He called Apex Towing directly. His brother-in-law answered. Within minutes, the tow truck arrived. The congregation's morning service was midway through. Hymns drifted through the stained glass windows. The tow driver hooked up the SUV as Carbone and Greer watched, arms crossed. They saw it as enforcing the rules, a last stand of professional discretion. They failed to see the larger picture they had just stepped into. Because at that moment, inside the church, Mayor Vance's phone vibrated silently in her purse. A real-time alert from the city's new vehicle tracking system, a pilot program for official cars that she had ironically championed for accountability. The alert read, "Unauthorized tow initiation detected on city asset." She excused herself and walked out into the morning light, the scene unfolding before her. But this was more than a simple parking violation. This was a test of the very system she was trying to build. The new policy stated that any tow of a city vehicle required immediate notification to the office of the mayor and the OPA. The officers had bypassed all of it. They had also, inadvertently, triggered a separate protocol, one for potential theft of government property. Vance didn't yell. She didn't confront them directly. She made one call, not to the police chief, not to her lawyer. She called the city's independent inspector general, a position her administration had recently empowered with emergency audit authority. The tow truck driver, sensing the shift in atmosphere, paused. Carbone barked at him to continue. The congregation, now filtering out, formed a silent ring of witnesses. Phones were raised. Vance spoke calmly into her phone, her eyes locked on the two officers. She quoted city ordinance numbers, the specific policy violation, the breach of protocol. The officers still thought this was about a parking spot. They didn't realize they had just handed the mayor the perfect, public, and undeniable case study of everything wrong with the old system. They had acted on bias, bypass procedure, and used a personal connection to a towing company for an enforcement action that was not theirs to take. All of it was captured on dozens of cell phone videos. But the true cliffhanger wasn't the video. It was what happened next. Inspector General Marcia Ree arrived within 12 minutes. She didn't speak to the mayor first. She walked directly to Officers Carbone and Greer and asked two questions. Did you confirm this vehicle was unlawfully parked with the property owner? And did you know this was a city asset before initiating the tow? Their answers, recorded in her notebook, would seal their fate. But as Ree turned to leave, Carbone, his face red with humiliation, muttered 5 words that would explode the case wide open. Words he thought no one heard. But a parishioner's phone, still recording, caught every syllable. And those words revealed this was never about parking at all. The words, muffled but clear, were, "That'll teach her to cut our overtime." In that moment, the narrative shattered. This was not about enforcing a parking sign. This was retribution. The parishioner who captured the audio, a software engineer named David Chen, knew immediately what he had. He didn't post it online. He emailed it directly to the mayor's office and the city's independent newspaper, the Riverside Chronicle. The clip arrived in the inbox of veteran reporter Anya Sharma just as Inspector General Ree was finishing her preliminary report. Sharma played it 3 times, a chill running down her spine. The story had just exploded from misconduct to conspiracy. She called the police union president, Frank Donnelly, for comment. His reaction was telling. He didn't deny the audio, he attacked the source. "This is a secret recording, possibly doctored, released by a mayor desperate to smear hardworking officers," he blustered. But the digital forensics were undeniable. The audio file's metadata placed it at the scene, at the exact time, recorded on a phone whose owner came forward voluntarily. The tech analysis found no edits, no tampering. Inside police headquarters, Chief Eduardo Ruiz faced a crisis he could no longer contain. A 30-year veteran, he had tried to walk a middle line between the reformist mayor and his old guard rank-and-file. The video was a public relations nightmare. The audio was a career-ending missile. He had 2 officers on tape admitting to a punitive tow against the city's chief executive. He placed Carbone and Greer on immediate administrative leave. But the leave paperwork hit a wall. The union's lawyer filed an injunction to block it, arguing no formal disciplinary hearing had occurred. The battle moved from the church parking lot to the courthouse, and then into the city's budget documents. Anya Sharma and her team began digging. What overtime cut was Carbone referring to? They combed through the last 6 months of city council subcommittee reports. Buried in a fiscal review was a line item: the police department. Special Patrol Initiative, a program that funded overtime for officers to monitor high-risk neighborhoods. The mayor's proposed budget shifted $2.3 million from that initiative to fund the new Civilian Parking Bureau and community crisis responders. The vote was scheduled for the Wednesday after the towing incident. The connection was now undeniable. The tow was a message, a pressure tactic, but who gave the order? Was it a spontaneous act by 2 angry officers or something coordinated? Sharma obtained the dispatch logs from that Sunday morning. The record showed Carbone's initial call about a suspicious vehicle at the church, but the call itself came from a non-emergency line registered to a phone box near the precinct. No one had actually called it in. It was a self-initiated check. Standard procedure, but it provided cover. Then she looked at the tow company. Apex Towing had received 47% of all police-initiated tow contracts over the past 3 years, a figure dramatically higher than its 2 competitors. The owner, when contacted, refused to comment, but a former dispatcher for Apex, speaking on condition of anonymity, told the Chronicle that certain officers had a direct line. Cars would be towed within minutes, often before the mandatory 30-minute waiting period expired. The company paid a kickback to the city per tow, but the dispatcher whispered about additional incentives for fast service on certain vehicles. The mayor's office, now armed with the audio and the budget link, moved with surgical precision. Vance did not hold a fiery press conference. Instead, she released a 3-sentence statement. The incident at Mount Zion Church is under full investigation by the Office of the Inspector General. The attempted tow of a city vehicle appears linked to efforts to intimidate this administration over lawful budget policy. We await the findings. The calmness of the statement was a weapon. It projected confidence, turning the officer's hot anger into a strategic liability. Public opinion, which had been divided, solidified overnight. The audio clip was played on every local news station. Editorials condemned the blatant abuse of power. The city's Black Clergy Alliance, representing over 50 churches, held a united press conference on the courthouse steps, demanding not just the firing of Carbone and Greer, but a federal review of the entire police towing protocol. Reverend Carter stood silently at the center, a powerful visual echo of the Sunday morning scene. But the institution fought back. The police union launched a counter-narrative. The mayor was using a minor incident to defund the police and destroy the careers of 2 dedicated public servants. They circulated a petition calling for Chief Ruiz's resignation for failing to protect his officers. They found sympathetic voices on the city council, who began to question the timing of the investigation so close to the budget vote. The political trench warfare was underway. Anya Sharma, following the money, made her next breakthrough. She filed a public records request for the personal financial disclosures of key union board members. What she found was a pattern, not a smoking gun. Union President Frank Donnelly had purchased a new boat 6 months prior. Officer Carbon's brother-in-law, the Apex towing manager, had bought a new home, all on civil service salaries. Coincidence, perhaps. But when she cross-referenced the tow data with arrest records, a more disturbing pattern emerged. A disproportionate number of people whose cars were towed by Apex following police calls later had their charges dropped or reduced. Was a tow being used as an informal extrajudicial punishment or as leverage? She took her findings to the Inspector General. Marcia Ree's team had been working parallel lines. They had subpoenaed the personal cell phone records of Carbon and Greer for the week leading up to the incident. The records showed a flurry of calls between the two officers, the union president, and a number registered to Apex Towing's main office. The calls spiked the night before the Sunday tow, after the city council's preliminary budget hearing where the overtime cuts were discussed. The investigation was now a criminal probe. The district attorney's public integrity unit was notified. The charge being considered: official misconduct, conspiracy, and potential bribery. The officers were no longer just facing termination, they were facing indictment. Yet in the precincts, a wall of silence descended. Officers who had privately criticized Carbon and Greer now closed ranks. The thin blue line tightened. The union provided the officers with top-tier legal representation. The message to the mayor was clear: you can fight 2 officers, but you're fighting the whole culture. Mayor Vance understood the calculus. Winning in court was one thing. Winning the street and the station house was another. She needed a defector, someone inside the system who was willing to break the code of silence. She and Inspector General Ree identified a potential target, Officer Ben Greer. The younger of the two, with a wife, a new baby, and no prior disciplinary record. Carbon was the ringleader, the true believer. Greer was the follower. Ree requested a second interview with Greer, separate from his partner. His lawyer, provided by the union, was present. Ree didn't confront him with the phone records immediately. She showed him a photograph. It was of his newborn daughter, taken at the church's community picnic the month before, an event where Mayor Vance had been present, holding the baby, smiling. Ree's question was quiet. Do you want your daughter to grow up in a city where the law is a weapon or a shield? The lawyer objected. The meeting ended, but the seed was planted. The pressure reached a breaking point on Thursday morning. The city council was set for its final budget vote at noon. At 10 a.m., a sealed envelope from the Inspector General's office was delivered to each council member. It contained a preliminary finding. Sufficient evidence exists to suggest the towing incident was a premeditated act of intimidation connected to the budget process, constituting a gross abuse of authority. At 10:30 a.m., Frank Donnelly held an emergency press conference outside Union headquarters. Surrounded by dozens of officers in uniform, he didn't talk about the budget. He unveiled a new tactic. He played a heavily edited clip of Mayor Vance from a year-old community meeting saying, "Some traditions in policing must end." The union's new ad blitz, he announced, would ask, "What traditions? Your safety." They were pivoting to a culture war, framing the mayor as anti-police. The two narratives were now on a collision course, one of corruption and accountability, the other of a mayor undermining public safety. The city held its breath waiting for the council vote. But at 11:15, 45 minutes before the vote, Anya Sharma received a phone call from a blocked number. A male voice, shaky but clear, said, "Check the union's discretionary fund, the one they don't talk about. The payments to Apex weren't just kickbacks." The line went dead. Sharma raced to her computer. The union's publicly filed tax forms showed its general fund, but there were rumors of a separate, off-the-books legal defense fund financed by anonymous donations. If union dues, or worse, money from a towing company implicated in misconduct, were flowing into a slush fund used to pressure politicians. This was no longer a local employment dispute. This was a racketeering case. She called her source at the district attorney's office. The person listened, then said 3 words before hanging up. Subpoena the bank. The escalation was now nuclear. The mayor's fight for a parking policy had just stumbled into a potential criminal conspiracy that reached into the heart of the police union itself. And the only people who knew how deep it went were 2 suspended officers, a union boss, and a tow truck kingpin who had just boarded a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. The race was on. With a key witness fleeing the country, the district attorney's office filed an emergency ex parte motion, a secret request to a judge, to freeze the union's financial accounts before the money could vanish. Judge Ada Lemon, known for her no-nonsense approach, granted the order at 7:15 that evening. By 8 p.m., auditors from the state attorney general's office were inside First Metropolitan Bank, sequestered in a back room with 3 years of transaction records for the Riverside Police Brotherhood Fund. What they found wasn't just a slush fund. It was a shadow accounting system. 2 separate ledgers existed. The public one showed member dues paying for legal services and community events. The private one, accessed through a dual signature requirement from Union President Donnelly and the Apex Towing owner, showed monthly deposits labeled service retainers that matched exactly the inflated number of tows Apex performed for the department. The total over 3 years, $1.8 million. But the shock wasn't the amount. It was the disbursements. The money wasn't just buying boats. Significant payments flowed to a shell company that, after a frantic night of corporate registry searches, was traced to a city councilman, Joel Prentice, the most vocal opponent of the mayor's parking reform. Prentice had received $90,000 in consulting fees over 2 years. His vote on the budget and on police oversight was literally for sale. Anya Sharma published the story at dawn. The city erupted. Councilman Prentice resigned by 9 a.m., sobbing on the steps of City Hall, claiming he was coerced. The union's wall of silence developed its first major crack. 5 rank-and-file officers, horrified their dues had been used to bribe an official, demanded an emergency meeting. The internal civil war Vance had hoped for was beginning. Yet the escape of the Apex owner created a critical evidence gap. He was the only one who could directly link the cash to specific orders, like the tow of the mayor's SUV. Without his testimony, the case rested on circumstantial financials and the damning audio. The district attorney needed a cooperating witness from inside the police side of the conspiracy. Inspector General Rhee returned to Officer Ben Greer. This time, she didn't bring a photo. She brought a spreadsheet. It showed the monthly retainer payments spiking in the months leading up to contentious city council votes on police funding. She laid it next to his personnel file, which showed a pristine record until his partnership with Carbone. "You're the follower, Ben," she said. "But followers still go to prison. The man you followed has a union-funded lawyer. The man who paid your union is on a beach. Who do you think they'll sacrifice?" Greer's lawyer, still paid by the union fund that was now frozen, shifted uncomfortably. The calculus had changed. The union could no longer afford its protection racket. Greer asked for a deal. The district attorney offered one: full cooperation, testimony against all co-conspirators, in exchange for immunity from prosecution and a guarantee of his pension. Greer took it. In a secured room, he began to talk. And what he revealed shifted the entire investigation from corruption to something far more sinister. The towing scheme, he said, was just the tip of the spear. The real purpose of the off-books fund was to create a political war chest to control not just the city council but potentially the mayor's office itself. The ultimate goal was to get a friendly mayor elected next cycle, one who would roll back reforms, restore the old budget, and guarantee the towing contracts continued. The Sunday morning tow, it was a stress test. A deliberate, arrogant provocation to see how the mayor would react, to gauge her weaknesses, and to send a message to other council members about the cost of crossing the union. Then he dropped the bombshell. The initial idea for the tow didn't come from Carbone or the union president. It came from a retired captain, a revered figure in the department, who now worked as a security consultant for several downtown property developers. These developers stood to lose millions if the mayor's zoning reforms, tied to her community safety plan, went through. The church parking lot was chosen specifically because it was sacred ground, guaranteeing maximum public outrage and media coverage. They never imagined the mayor's car had a tracker. They never imagined she wouldn't scream, but would call the inspector general. Their theatrical display of power had backfired spectacularly, exposing the entire machine. The conspiracy now had three layers: the officers on the street, the union bureaucracy, and powerful external business interests pulling strings. This was no longer a police misconduct case. It was a racketeering and corruption case that reached into the city's economic power structure. Armed with Greer's statement, prosecutors obtained warrants for the retired captain's phone and financial records. They also subpoenaed the financial records of the three major development firms. The city elite, who had been watching the scandal from a distance, were now directly in the crosshairs. The backlash was immediate and violent. That night, the windows of Anya Sharma's home were smashed with bricks. A note was left: "Stop digging." Mayor Vance's city-issued SUV was keyed down to the metal while parked in a secured garage. The message was clear: "We can still reach you." But the intimidation had the opposite effect. Public support for the mayor and the investigation solidified into something hardened, furious. A community defense network formed, volunteering to watch the homes of investigators and journalists. Donations poured into a legal fund for the DA's office. The story went national. The pressure fractured the remaining conspirators. Facing RICO charges that carried 20-year sentences, Union President Frank Donnelly lawyered up with a high-priced criminal attorney, severing ties with the union. He was preparing to cut his own deal. Officer Mitch Carbone, abandoned by his union and his partner, was left isolated. His brother-in-law at Apex was picked up by federal agents at a layover in Reykjavik, carrying $40,000 in cash. Just as it seemed the house of cards was collapsing, the system struck back in its most predictable way. The city council, now missing a corrupt member but still swayed by police union lobbying, voted to postpone the budget decision indefinitely, citing the ongoing turmoil. The mayor's key policy initiative was stalled. The old guard, though wounded, was using bureaucratic procedure to win the war even as they lost the legal battle. Worse, the developers filed a massive lawsuit against the city, alleging the mayor and the DA were conducting a politically motivated witch hunt that damaged their businesses and violated their rights. It was a frivolous suit, but it would tie up city resources in court for years. The corruption was now using the law itself as a shield. Mayor Vance stood at a precipice. She had the evidence. She had public opinion. But the political and legal machinery was grinding her reforms to a halt. She needed a decisive, public victory to break the logjam. She needed to show not just that the corrupt could be investigated, but that they could be definitively, unmistakably defeated. She called a meeting with the district attorney and Inspector General Rhee. The path forward, she argued, was not through another closed-door indictment. It was through sunlight. They would release the full, unredacted report of the Inspector General's findings to the public, followed immediately by a press conference where Greer would tell his story on camera. They would bypass the political theater and take the case directly to the people who own the city, its residents. The DA hesitated. It could taint a jury pool. It was unorthodox. But Vance countered. The jury pool was already tainted. The orthodox methods had allowed this corruption to fester for a decade. It was time for a new playbook. They set the date for the public reckoning, Friday at 10 a.m. in City Hall Plaza. The announcement sent shockwaves. The union called it a star chamber. The developers' lawyers filed for an injunction to stop it. The stage was set for a final, dramatic confrontation. But on Thursday afternoon, the night before the showdown, Mayor Vance received a hand-delivered letter. It was from the law firm representing the developers. It contained no legal threats. Instead, it contained an offer, a private meeting that evening at a neutral location. The subject, a settlement. They wanted to talk. The powerful, for the first time, were asking for terms. Vance knew this was the most dangerous moment of all. Walking into that meeting could be a trap. Refusing it could be spun as her being unreasonable. Every move was now a potential checkmate. She looked at the letter, then at her team. The final play was not going to be in a courtroom or a plaza. It was going to be in a quiet room where the fate of the city would be negotiated in whispers, just as it always had been. But this time, she held all the evidence and they knew it. The only question was what she would choose to do with it. Mayor Vance walked into the meeting at the old library conference room with two things, her city attorney and a court-approved wire. The developers' lawyers laid out their offer: drop all investigations and they would support her parking reform. In exchange, the towing contracts would stay with Apex under new management. It was a bribe wrapped in a compromise. Vance listened politely, then slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was a screenshot of a bank transfer from one of the developers' shell companies to the Union's secret fund, dated the day before the church tow. "This is the discovery the district attorney will enter into evidence tomorrow," she said calmly. "You're not offering a deal. You're attempting to obstruct a federal investigation." The lawyers blanched. They had not known about the wire. They had just confessed to a felony on a federal recording. The following morning, the public reckoning proceeded as planned, but its nature had changed. It was no longer a presentation of evidence. It was a victory declaration. Inspector General Rhee stood at the podium in City Hall Plaza, flanked by the district attorney and Mayor Vance. She summarized the findings: conspiracy, bribery, racketeering. Then she introduced Officer Ben Greer. A hush fell over the crowd as Greer, looking weary but resolved, stepped to the microphone. He confirmed everything: the punitive nature of the tow, the pressure from the union, the involvement of the retired captain and the developers. He apologized to the mayor, to the congregation of Mount Zion, and to the city. His testimony, broadcast live, was the final nail in the coffin. By the end of the day, the district attorney unsealed indictments against 7 individuals: former officers Mitch Carbone and Frank Donnelly, the retired police captain, 3 property developers, and the captured Apex towing owner. The charges ranged from official misconduct and bribery to conspiracy under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Carbone, arrested at his home, offered no resistance. The system he believed would protect him had evaporated. The political dominoes fell swiftly. With the corruption exposed, the city council, desperate to appear reform-minded, unanimously passed Mayor Vance's full budget package, including the permanent shift of towing authority to the Civilian Bureau and the funding for community responders. They also approved a sweeping audit of all city contracts. The police department underwent a seismic change. Chief Ruiz, exonerated of complicity but chastened by his earlier hesitancy, announced a full cooperation agreement with the Department of Justice to overhaul internal affairs. 20 officers linked to the illicit fund were placed on desk duty pending review. A new interim union board was elected, its first act to formally apologize and create a transparent, member-controlled financial system. The consequences extended beyond the courtroom. The 3 development firms, facing massive lawsuits from the city and public shunning, settled for a combined $42 million, which Vance dedicated to a community land trust to build affordable housing in the very neighborhoods targeted by the predatory towing. For Clara Watkins and hundreds like her, the restitution was immediate. The new parking bureau reviewed every tow from the past 5 years. Improper tows were refunded, with interest. Wrongful foreclosures linked to the scheme were reversed. Clara received her formal apology and a new, low-interest mortgage in a ceremony at City Hall. But the most profound change was cultural. The collectors were gone. The code of silence was broken. The new policy mandated that every police-initiated tow required dual authorization from a supervisor and a civilian controller, with body camera footage and GPS logging. The prophet was removed from punishment. At the next Sunday service at Mount Zion, Mayor Vance parked her SUV in the same spot. This time, a small, dignified plaque had been installed nearby by the congregation. It read, "A Seat of Justice, May 15th. Reverend Carter preached on the Book of Micah, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly." The congregation stood and applauded not for the mayor, but for the victory of accountability itself. The final, surprising detail emerged from the forensic audit. The investigators, tracing the illicit union fund, found a single, curious outgoing payment of $5,000 made every quarter to a private postal box. The box was rented under a false name, but the security footage from the postal store showed a recognizable figure collecting the mail, a mid-level analyst from the city's own budget office. This analyst had been leaking the mayor's confidential meeting schedules and vehicle itineraries to the union for over a year. The Sunday the mayor's placard fell to the floorboard wasn't an accident. It was because her detailed schedule, leaked by a city employee, indicated she would be using her personal car that day. The SUV at the church was a surprise to them. They towed it anyway, arrogantly confident. The mole was arrested, a quiet coda to the loud scandal, proving that corruption seeps into the smallest cracks and vigilance must be endless. With the corrupt apparatus dismantled, Mayor Vance turned to rebuilding. The reforms were locked in. The city had looked into the abyss of how its institutions could be weaponized and had chosen a different path. The two officers who hooked the tow truck to her car that Sunday morning were not just fired. They became the catalyst that cleansed an entire system. Their arrogant stunt, meant to teach a lesson, ultimately taught the city one: that when authority is abused in the light of day, it can be ended before the final hymn is sung. The story that began in a church parking lot echoes far beyond the city limits of Riverside. It's a blueprint and a warning. It shows how a single, brazen act of overreach can unravel a vast network of corruption, but only if met with calm authority, meticulous evidence, and unwavering public scrutiny. For every Mayor Vance, there are countless others facing similar entrenched systems. The lesson isn't that corruption is everywhere, but that it is vulnerable. It depends on silence, on intimidation, on the assumption that no one will connect the dots between a tow truck, a union fund, and a developer's bank account. This case proved that when those dots are connected, when a parishioner shares a recording, a reporter follows a paper trail, and an officer finds his conscience, the entire structure can collapse. The lingering question is not whether it could happen again. It will. The real question is whether we will be ready to see it. Will we recognize the abuse of power when it's dressed in a uniform or hidden in a line item? And will we have the courage and the tools to call it by its name? What happened that Sunday morning was a collision between two ideas of power. One was old, coercive, and thought itself untouchable. The other was newer, rooted in transparency and accountable to the people it served. Only one walked away intact. This is more than a story about parking. It's about who controls the public space, both physical and political. It's a reminder that accountability is not an event, but a system, one we must choose to build and defend every single day. If you found this story of justice and systemic change compelling, make sure to subscribe. We uncover true stories of power, corruption, and the people who fight back. Your subscription helps bring more of these vital narratives to light. Until next time.